Good evening. The Scottish Government has been urged to do more to tackle vehicle pollution over the next 2 decades after the UK Government announced a ban on the sale of new diesel and petrol cars from 2040. However, ministers here say they already have a policy in place to remove emissions from fossil fuel vehicles by 2050. Here's our transport correspondent, David Henderson.
So on the face of it, it looks very similar to a normal car. Slight differences though.
One very slight difference, which is no exhaust tailpipe.
Could all cars be like this by 2040? It's what the UK government now wants. Right now, only 1 in 100 cars sold here is electric, but that looks set to change.
People are buying into the idea of electric cars a lot more now. Not everyone is convinced, which is why we have things like the hybrid engines, where people who aren't quite ready to jump to the 100% electric are making the transition through a hybrid engine and then moving on towards the full electric. But as the technology gets better, people's confidence will grow.
So we took it for a test drive.
Foot on the brake.
And you push the start button. That's you on.
That it?
That's it.
Very quiet.
And it blended in with the other traffic. Car makers claim it's got the strengths of a petrol car without a key weakness, exhaust fumes. And government ministers are listening.
We have to get rid of petrol and diesel cars off our roads if we're going to make sure not only that we deal with the health problems that air pollution causes, but also that we meet our climate change targets. And the good news is that the car industry is already moving in this direction. So Volvo and indeed just yesterday Mini are both moving in this way. It's critically important that we provide the encouragement from government to help the car industry do the right thing.
So where does that UK deadline leave a Scottish strategy? Ministers here have 3 targets spread over a longer time frame. By 2030, they want half the number of petrol cars driving in urban areas. A decade later, new cars should produce no harmful emissions. And by 2050, they want no petrol vehicles in our towns and cities. The Green Party says that's not fast enough.
Obviously we would want to be more ambitious, and there are opportunities associated with that, not least to deal with this social justice issue that 40,000 people a year are dying as a result of fumes.
Electric cars require electricity, and as their numbers increase, we'll have to see more of these things, chargers, on streets in villages and towns around the country to cope with demand.
Tonight, the Scottish Government said its clean air strategy is the best in Europe, and it's committed to a dramatic rise in low-emission vehicles on our roads. It's now studying those UK plans to see what they mean for Scotland. David Henderson, reporting Scotland.
Well, of course, electric cars would result in a bigger demand for electricity. And our environment correspondent Kevin Keane joins us. Kevin, how big a change will this mean?
Well, this would have to be huge, and it would see a huge spike in demand for electricity here in Scotland. And in many respects, the Scottish Government is ahead of the game on that. They produced earlier this year this document, the Scottish Energy Strategy, and that recognises that point and sets out how in the future they will meet that demand for electricity. More power stations from things like gas, if carbon capture and storage can be revived, but also from things like the sun, the wind, and from water as well. This is an Archimedes screw which takes the power of the River Don and turns that into electricity. But these are long-term strategies motivated primarily by climate change. What we're talking about here is a plan to tackle air pollution. Environmental groups say that actually these are solutions that are a generation away, and we need much more immediate solutions. They want an immediate ban on high-polluting vehicles in the most polluted areas, largely our towns and city centres. The Scottish Government has committed to 1 low-emission zone in Scotland, but there are 14 local authority areas with these problems, and Friends of the Earth Scotland says much more immediate solutions need to be conceived, and those solutions need to be worked on and put in place very, very quickly.
Kevin Keane, thank you. With drugs deaths continuing to rise, the Scottish Government says it's reviewing its strategy. It comes as a report suggests that inequality and deprivation amongst young men in the 1980s has contributed to the rising toll today. Here's our political correspondent, Nick Ardley.
Choose life, choose a job.
It brought Scotland's drug culture to a worldwide audience. Trainspotting. But how accurate a depiction of the 1980s? Gary Fraser worked on the second film, chosen by Danny Boyle because of his own movies, covering the real-life train spotting generation in Muirhouse.
You shut down people's ability to feed themselves, to put clothes on their family. You create a massive amount of people who become welfare dependent, poverty, addiction, and that's the social economic circumstances that provide the perfect storm for addiction and alcoholism to flourish.
Today's report suggests rising inequality in the 1980s increased the risk of drug-related deaths. At particular risk, poorer men born between 1960 and 80, victims, the report says, of economic and social conditions at the time. Today, the Scottish Government said it was refreshing its drugs policy.
Policies that were taken over 30 years ago have had an impact on people here and now, and that we are having to cope by providing the service and trying to find some way to get these people the service and the support that they require.
But one man who's struggled with addiction since the 1980s says he can't get the help he needs.
I keep getting refused till, the funding's not there's not enough money, and I go to my community kind of addiction services and ask for help, and they'll go, we'll increase your methadone by another 10 mil, which isn't helping.
Opposition parties want more help.
We really need to look at how do we change people's lives and not just leave them on a sort of a methadone journey which we don't have any facts that the treatment's working.
We know that austerity is a harmful, cruel policy that the current Tories are pursuing. That should be abandoned because we see the same mistakes being repeated. But also here in Scotland we've seen the SNP cut budgets for local drug and alcohol and recovery services, and we can't afford to keep doing that.
Back in Edinburgh, Gary's also worried another generation could be at risk.
If children or people want to escape, let's help them a wee bit as well. Let's put some people who have the real life experience that have been through addiction and stuff like that there.
Nick Eardley, reporting Scotland.
The number of elderly prisoners has risen by more than 20% in the past year. It's partly as a result of the rise of convictions for historical sex offences. And a new report says it's putting strain on staff and existing facilities. Our Home Affairs correspondent, Rival Alderson, can tell us more.
Barlinnie Prison in Glasgow, grim and Victorian, designed to hold young men and difficult to adapt for the rapidly rising number of older prisoners held in Scottish jails. The prison's inspectorate today highlights the problem and says a new strategy for dealing with older inmates is urgently needed.
We found a 72-year-old man sleeping on a top bunk. We found someone in a wheelchair whose wheelchair didn't fit through the cell door. And so it's clear that there are inappropriate accommodation. And what we're saying is that their needs have to be met, whether for medical or social care.
Alan, who's 68, was convicted of drugs offences. He says although elderly prisoners are well looked after by prison staff, other inmates have to help too.
We recently had a chap there in his mid-80s. And he was also partially blind and partially deaf, and he was pretty much left to his own devices really. Things like helping him use the phone and things like that. The officers do seem to be sympathetic towards it, but obviously they're quite busy, and we all sort of mucked in a bit really.
The challenge facing the Scottish Prison Service is growing rapidly. A year ago there were 280 prisoners in Scottish jails aged 60 or over. Today, there are more than 340. That's a rise in a year of 20%. And 65% of these elderly prisoners are serving 4 years or more. Modern jails are more suitable for elderly prisoners, but even then the cost to the prison service of looking after those with complex health and social care needs is considerable, and it's rising.
At present we are spending just under £1 million buying in social care for those in our care. It's a significant cost, but I think we're all determined to ensure that people in our care receive the care and attention that they deserve and that they need.
The report suggests separate units for older prisoners, either inside or out with existing jails. But the prison service says most older prisoners don't want to be segregated from younger inmates. Rival Alderson reporting Scotland.